The sun was low that evening, hanging over the desert like a weary lantern that had burned too long. The air was thick with dust and the sound of restless hooves. Men gathered in the auction yard, their faces leathered by sun and wind, their voices coarse as gravel. Some came for cattle, some for horses, some only to watch and pass the time. It smelled of tobacco, smoke, and sweat, and the sharp iron tang of horses that feared their own fates. The auctioneer's voice cut through the air like a whip, fast and merciless. One horse after another was paraded across the yard. Strong ones fetched high bids, muscles rippling beneath polished hides. Young colts with clear eyes found eager buyers who dreamed of races and work well done. The crowd's energy rose with every hammer strike. But as the evening waned, the last horse was led forward and silence fell. The kind of silence that is not respect, but shame. The animal looked less like a horse and more like a shadow of one. Its ribs showed like bars of a cage. Its mane hung tangled and thin, like strands of forgotten rope. Its eyes, oh, its eyes. They did not gleam with fire or fear, but with something colder, a sorrow deep enough to drown in. Eyes that told a story of abandonment, of hunger, of being left too long in the darkness. The crowd reacted as men often do when confronted with brokenness. They laughed. A rancher spat and muttered the word cursed. Another man jeered, not worth the hay it would eat. Children whispered behind their mothers' skirts, pointing at the pitiful creature. Even the auctioneer, who had barked with vigor all day, now sighed and droned his call, voice dropping with disinterest. No hands rose. Not one. At the far edge of the yard sat Jonah Hale. He was not a man people noticed much anymore. His beard had grown white along the edges, his hat shadowing eyes that carried more winters than he wished to count. Once, long ago, he had been tall with pride, a soldier of sorts, a rancher with a family, and a future bright as morning sun. But loss had a way of carving men down to their quietest form. His wife, Sarah, had been buried beneath the cottonwood tree behind the old church. His boy, only 12, had gone with fever one hard winter, leaving the house too quiet for Jonah's ears to bear. Since then, he lived on the edge of town, his ranch half empty, his life stitched together by routine and silence. But when Jonah looked at that horse, he did not see bones. He saw himself. He saw weary eyes that had given up on kindness. He saw a body that had been worn thin by neglect. He saw the very shape of loneliness standing before him, trembling under the jeers of strangers. The auctioneer coughed, shifting his ledger, ready to move on without a sale. The crowd was restless, murmuring about supper and whiskey. And then Jonah raised his hand. The air stilled. $1, Jonah said, his voice low but steady. A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd like a sudden breeze. $1, repeated the auctioneer, almost amused. Do I hear too? Silence. Men shook their heads, smirking. The hammer fell. Sold. Laughter followed Jonah as he stood. Fools will always find joy in pointing at another fool. But Jonah paid no mind. He walked with slow steps to the horse, who flinched when he drew near. Its breath came ragged, its ears flicked back, waiting for another blow that never came. Jonah reached out, not fast, not insistent, just steady, as if offering time itself. His hand brushed the rough mane. For a moment, the horse stiffened. Then, as if some buried memory of gentleness stirred, it stilled. The stable boy handed Jonah the rope, shaking his head. Waste of money, mister. That beast won't last the month. Jonah said nothing. He took the rope, and together he and the horse stepped out of the yard. Behind them, laughter rang, the sound of men who had never looked brokenness in the eye and dared to love it anyway. The road stretched westward, painted gold by the dying sun. Dust curled around their feet, soft as old smoke. Jonah walked in silence, the horse limping beside him, head bowed. As the town lights faded behind them, Jonah whispered, not loud, not for the world to hear, only for the creature beside him. Maybe you and I are not finished yet. The horse flicked an ear, as though it heard. The desert wind carried the sound away, wrapping it into the vast silence of the west. And so, man and horse walked into the twilight together, two shadows against a horizon that still held the faintest promise of tomorrow. The first nights were the hardest. The horse stood in Jonah's corral like a ghost rooted to the earth. He would not eat. He would not move. He only stared at nothing, his body so still that sometimes Jonah feared he had already slipped into death and left only the husk behind. Jonah named him nothing at first. Names, he thought, belonged to creatures who wished to live. And this horse seemed uncertain of that wish. Neighbors came by, curious to see the fool's purchase. They leaned on the split-rail fence, chewing tobacco, shaking heads. "That thing's more shadow than horse," one said. "Won't last a month," said another. "A man's grief makes him soft in the head." A third whispered, "Not quiet enough." Jonah ignored them. A man who listens too closely to ridicule soon finds himself hollow. Each morning, Jonah set a bucket of clean water by the corral. Each evening, he laid fresh hay. Sometimes the horse nibbled, more often he did not. But Jonah never took the food away. He knew something about waiting in silence. He had lived in it for years. On the third day, Claire arrived. She was a widow, her husband lost in a mining accident 2 winters past. She taught the children their letters in a small schoolhouse on the edge of town. Folks admired her quiet strength, but often mistook her gentleness for fragility. She came with a basket in her arms, a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth, steam still rising. "You'll forget to eat," she said, placing it on Jonah's porch rail. Jonah, awkward with kindness, only nodded. Clara's eyes drifted to the corral. The horse stood there like a statue carved of bone and sorrow. "Poor thing," she murmured. "But maybe he only needs someone who won't give up on him." Jonah's eyes flickered, for a heartbeat, toward hers. He said nothing, but in the silence, she seemed to understand. That night, Jonah sat on a wooden stool by the fence. He did not try to approach. He only sat and hummed an old tune Sarah used to sing while kneading bread. The melody drifted into the dark like smoke. The horse's ears twitched. For the first time, Jonah felt the animal's gaze rest on him, not through him. Days stretched into weeks. Progress came not as a march, but as a whisper. The horse took a mouthful of hay. The horse drank from a bucket, while Jonah stood only a few feet away. The horse flinched less when Jonah's shadow passed. It was like watching frost thaw from the ground 1 drop at a time. Sheriff Alden stopped by one afternoon, his hat pulled low, boots scuffing the dust. He leaned against the fence, studying the bony frame of the horse. "You always were stubborn, Jonah," he said. "But stubborn don't heal what's already dying." Jonah's hand rested on the fence rail. He did not argue. The sheriff wasn't cruel, only wary. He had seen too many men pour themselves into hopeless causes, then break when the cause gave way. But Jonah wasn't pouring himself out. He was only offering presence, steady as a stone. That night, under moonlight pale as milk, Jonah brought a brush into the corral. He did not rush. He let the horse see the tool, sniff it, shy away, return again. Then, slowly, Jonah lifted the brush and ran it once along the tangled mane. The horse trembled so violently Jonah thought he might collapse. But he did not run. Jonah whispered, voice low as prayer. "I've trembled too." Stroke after stroke, the brush moved through knotted hair, pulling loose burrs, smoothing what had been neglected. The horse lowered his head at last, not in defeat, but in weary surrender. Jonah felt a tightness in his chest ease, the kind that had bound him since Sarah's passing. He began to speak to the horse then, not words of command, but fragments of memory. He spoke of the river that ran slow behind his ranch. He spoke of his boy's laughter when he tried to rope calves too quick. He spoke of Sarah's bread, the way the smell lingered through the house on cold mornings. The horse listened in his own way, ears flicking, muscles softening, a deep exhale now and then. By the end of the month, Jonah dared place a saddle across the horse's back. He did not climb on. He only let the leather rest there, heavy and unfamiliar. The horse stiffened, then stilled. Jonah patted his side, a steady rhythm. "You're stronger than they see," Jonah murmured. "Stronger than you believe." From the fence, Clara watched sometimes when she thought Jonah wouldn't notice. There was a softness in her gaze, not pity, but recognition. She knew something about carrying sorrow quietly. She saw how Jonah's patience was not only healing the horse, but mending the man himself. Still, progress was fragile. Some days the horse turned away, refusing all food, refusing touch. On those days, Jonah did not push. He sat in the dust, hat pulled low, humming that same old tune, waiting until the horse drew near again. Neighbors laughed still, but softer now. There was something unsettling about seeing a man's quiet devotion refuse to break. The school children gave the horse a name among themselves, the Ghost. But Jonah, in the privacy of night, began to call him something else. Ash, he whispered, stroking the pale line along the horse's muzzle. Because fire leaves more than ruin. Sometimes it leaves the chance to begin again. The horse's ear flicked, as though in agreement. And for the first time in years, Jonah felt the stirrings of hope move within him like a river thawing under spring sun. The world had cast both of them aside, man and beast. But here, in the quiet corners of his ranch, beneath stars older than sorrow itself, Jonah began to believe that broken things might yet learn to live again. The morning Ash first ran was the morning Jonah felt the weight on his chest ease, if only for a breath. The sky had just opened into dawn, a pale wash of rose and silver spilling across the valley. Jonah leaned against the corral rail, hands roughened from years of work, and watched the horse paw at the ground, uncertain, restless. For weeks, Ash had been learning to walk with steadier steps, to eat with hunger, to bear the weight of a saddle without trembling. But this morning, something different stirred in him, like a flame hidden too long, suddenly catching air. With no warning, Ash lunged forward. His legs stretched, awkward at first, then surer. Dust rose in clouds behind him, and his mane whipped like black smoke in the wind. He circled the corral, faster and faster, until the years of neglect seemed to fall away in each stride. Jonah's throat tightened. He had seen horses run before, strong and flawless, but never had he seen one rise from such shadows. It was not speed that moved him, but the defiance of it, as though Ash was shouting without words that he was still alive. That afternoon, Jonah opened the gate and led Ash into the open field. The horse lifted his head toward the horizon, nostrils flaring. Jonah swung into the saddle, his body remembering the weight, the rhythm, the old forgotten joy. Together they moved, first a walk, then a trot, then a gallop that carried Jonah like a boy again, the wind tearing the years from his face. Villagers watched from a distance, mouths parted, as the worthless horse thundered across the land with the quiet rancher astride him. Whispers followed, softer now, tinged with awe. By evening, Clara found Jonah at his porch, brushing dust from Ash's coat. Her eyes shone as she watched the horse lower his head to Jonah's touch like a creature long accustomed to love. "You've given him his life back," she said gently. Jonah shook his head. "No, he gave it back to me." Clara's gaze lingered on him, tender and unspoken, before she turned toward the path home. For a while, it seemed peace might return to Jonah's days. The ranch no longer felt hollow. The silence in his house no longer echoed quite so sharply. There was bread on the table sometimes when Clara passed by. There was a horse in the field whose gallop reminded him that brokenness did not always end in ruin. But peace in the West was a fragile thing. Word began to drift in a town of outlaws riding the edges of the county. Cattle stolen, barns set ablaze, men beaten or worse. Folks spoke of them around supper tables, their voices low. The leader was said to be a man named Cutter, a figure half hidden in rumor, cruel and sharp as his name. One evening, Sheriff Alden came to Jonah's ranch. He rested his hands on the rail, his eyes narrowing as Ash grazed nearby. "They're moving closer," he said. "Won't be long before they come through this valley. You've got little enough here, Jonah, but they won't care. Fire leaves nothing behind." Jonah said nothing for a long moment. He looked at Ash, the way the horse's ears twitched, alert to every whisper of the wind. "I've run enough in my life," Jonah said at last. "I'll not run again." The sheriff studied him, then sighed. "Then be ready." That night, Jonah sat by the corral, his rifle across his knees. Ash stood close, the heat of his breath misting in the cool air. Jonah stroked his muzzle, speaking softly into the dark. "They'll come, boy, and I'll stand. But I won't stand alone, will I?" Ash pressed his head gently against Jonah's shoulder, and the man felt strength surge through him that he thought long buried. Days passed heavy with waiting. Each sound on the horizon set hearts quickening. The town grew tense. Doors were barred earlier, lamps dimmed sooner. Even Clara walked with quicker steps, though her eyes still found Jonah's with a quiet steadiness, as if to say she believed he would endure. One evening, Jonah and Clara sat on the porch steps as the sun bled red into the mountains. Ash grazed nearby, tail swishing, body no longer a shadow, but a creature proud and strong. Clara spoke, her voice hushed. "When I lost Daniel, my husband, folks told me time would heal. But it wasn't time. It was the small mercies. A kind word, a steady hand, a neighbor who left bread at the door. That's what kept me alive." Jonah turned toward her, his eyes softening in a way they hadn't for years. "And who gives those mercies to you, Clara?" Her lips curved just slightly. "Perhaps a man who saved a horse no one else wanted." The silence that followed was tender, filled with all the words they did not yet need to say. But when night fell and the coyotes howled in the distance, Jonah's heart tightened. For he knew the storm was close now. He checked his rifle, laid out cartridges, and whispered a prayer he hadn't spoken since Sarah's last breath. In the corral, Ash stamped the ground, eyes gleaming in the moonlight, as though he too sensed what was coming. Jonah placed a hand on his neck. "If we must ride into the fire, we'll ride together." The horse snorted, a sound like agreement, like a vow. And so, beneath the endless sweep of stars, man and beast stood side by side, waiting for the horizon to burn. The night the outlaws came, the wind carried the scent of smoke before the flames could be seen. Jonah was awake already, sitting at the edge of his bed with his boots half-laced, as though his body had known before his mind that the storm was arriving. He heard the distant shouts, the gunfire snapping like firecrackers against the silence of the valley. Then came the glow, orange and cruel, rising beyond the far ridge. Ash neighed in the corral, a sharp, cutting sound that sliced through Jonah's chest. Jonah stepped outside, rifle in hand, and saw the horizon bloom with fire. The raiders were here. In the town below, doors slammed shut, families huddled close. Cutter's men, 6, maybe 7, tore through the valley, setting torches to barns, driving cattle into the darkness, firing their pistols in the air like wild gods who feared nothing. But Jonah Hale did not run. Not this time. He saddled Ash with hands that did not tremble. The horse stamped the ground, muscles alive, eyes burning with a fire that had not been there when Jonah first led him from the auction yard. Jonah swung into the saddle, the weight of years settling into place as if he had been preparing for this ride all his life. He whispered, "Together, boy," and Ash leapt forward. They tore through the night, a streak of shadow and flame, weaving between burning fence posts, cutting across fields already blackened with smoke. Bullets cracked the air, sparks flared where lead struck stone. Jonah leaned low against Ash's neck, feeling the surge of power beneath him, a power no one had believed this horse still held. The outlaws turned at the thunder of hooves. Cutter, broad-shouldered and cruel-eyed, spat a curse and raised his gun. Ash darted sideways, leaping a fallen beam, moving with a swiftness that seemed unearthly. Jonah fired once, twice. A man fell, another scrambled back. But they kept coming. Then came the moment. Jonah wheeled Ash hard, but too late. An outlaw stepped from behind a burning cart, his pistol aimed straight at Jonah's chest. Time slowed. Jonah saw the gun flash, felt death rushing toward him. And Ash moved. The horse threw himself sideways, body striking Jonah with brutal force, shoving him from the path of the bullet. The shot tore through Ash's flank. He screamed, a sound no man forgets once heard, but he did not fall. Instead, he surged forward, carrying Jonah with impossible strength, barreling through smoke and gunfire, leaping fences, outrunning death itself. Villagers saw it from the distance. The broken horse no one had wanted, now ablaze with defiance, charging through the fire like some spirit of the West. Ash carried Jonah straight into the heart of the outlaws, scattering them like chaff. Jonah's rifle barked. Men fell, torches dropped into the dirt. The tide turned. Inspired by the sight, townsfolk rallied. Farmers with pitchforks, shopkeepers with shotguns, women with stones in their fists. The valley long bowed in fear rose. The outlaws fled into the night, their leader cursing, his men broken. Cutter himself was thrown from his horse by a bullet that grazed his shoulder, his curse lost in the roar of retreat. When silence returned, it was broken only by the crackle of dying flames. Jonah slid from the saddle, his heart hammering, his hands reaching for ash. The horse stood trembling, sides heaving, blood dark on his flank. Jonah pressed his forehead against the animal's neck, tears spilling into the dust. "You saved me," he whispered, voice breaking. "God help me, you saved me." Ash swayed but did not fall. His eyes met Jonah's, not clouded with sorrow now, but fierce, alive, filled with something greater than survival. Clara came running through the smoke, skirts torn, hair loose around her shoulders. She knelt beside Jonah, her hand steady on his shoulder. Together they pressed cloth to Ash's wound, whispering comfort as if the horse could hear every word. And perhaps he did. Dawn came slow, golden light spilling over a valley scarred but still standing. Townsfolk gathered, voices hushed, their eyes drawn again and again to Jonah's horse. The horse they had laughed at, mocked, dismissed. Now he stood wounded but unbroken, head lifted against the rising sun. Sheriff Alden placed a hand on Jonah's arm. "That animal's got more soul than half the men I've known." Jonah nodded, his voice low. He was the saddest horse in the auction. And now he's the bravest soul I've ever known. Clara's hand lingered on Jonah's. He met her gaze, and in that quiet, something passed between them. Not promise, not yet, but the first warmth of it. The kind of warmth a man can carry through the rest of his days. Ash flicked his tail, as though impatient with their sentiment, and the crowd laughed softly, relief rippling through their tired hearts. And so, under that dawn, the valley began again. Some say the West was built on strength. I say it was built on second chances. For every creature cast aside, there may yet be a story waiting. One of defiance, one of redemption, one of love given and returned. Sometimes the world will laugh at what you choose to save. Sometimes it will call you a fool for loving what is broken. But broken things have a way of teaching us the fiercest kind of courage. And if ever you doubt, remember the saddest horse in the auction, and the unthinkable ride that saved a man's life and a town's spirit, all in one breath. If this tale found its way into your heart, stay by the fire with me a while longer. Like this story, share it with those who still believe in second chances. Leave me a word below. Tell me from where you're listening tonight. And if your spirit hungers for more Wild West tales, subscribe to this old storyteller's journey. There are more memories to unfold, more truths waiting in the dust. For tonight, let this be enough. Two shadows, once broken, riding together into dawn.